Wait, what?
Okay, so we left off talking about Charles Darwin and his theory of natural selection and how natural selection consists of 4 parts. Reproduction, okay, variation that exists, so some slight difference. That difference gives them an advantage for that competition, so they live longer, survive, reproduce, pass on that trait, and then over time, you might see tortoises with longer necks. So, adaptations. Natural selection explains how all species change over time as their environments change. Through natural selection, a helpful variation in one individual can be passed on to future members of a population. As time passes, more variations arise. The accumulation of many similar variations can lead to an adaptation. So when you find that trait throughout that entire species, like the jackrabbit with its big ears, or powerful legs, okay, like polar bears, they have like hollow fur.
They do?
Yeah, for insulation. And, my wallabies, they use their tail as a rudder or can pause fetal development. But, yeah. An adaptation is an inherited trait that increases an organism's chance of surviving and reproducing in its environment. The long neck of certain species of tortoises is an adaptation to an environment with tall cacti. Types of adaptations. I think we are still on soup. So, favorite soup. This person's favorite soup is egg soup. Who likes egg soup?
No.
It is Edwin.
What type of soup is that? I don't know. Another type of that. It's really good.
It's actually really good.
I hate it. Try it. Have you had it? No. Every species has many adaptations. Scientists classify adaptations into 3 categories: structural, behavioral, and functional. Structural adaptations involve color, shape, and other physical characteristics. The shape of a tortoise's neck is a structural adaptation. Behavioral adaptations involve the way an organism behaves or acts. Hunting at night and moving in herds are examples of behavioral adaptations. Functional adaptations involve internal body systems that affect biochemistry. A drop in body temperature during hibernation is an example of a functional adaptation. Figure 9 illustrates examples of all 3 types of adaptations in the desert jackrabbit.
Alright, so figure 9, the desert jackrabbit has structural, behavioral, and functional adaptations. These adaptations enable it to survive in its desert environment. Structural adaptation, a jackrabbit's powerful legs help it run fast to escape from predators. Behavioral adaptation, it stays still during the hottest part of the day, helping it conserve energy. And then in functional adaptation, you can see here in its ears the blood vessels that expand. And so when the blood travels through the ear, it cools, and it brings that cooler blood back to the organism. And so it can lower its body temperature during those hot summer or hot days out on the outback. Or actually, you can probably find them in South Dakota too. I don't know where you find jackrabbits. Where you find jackrabbits?
I think I've had one in our yard before.
Okay. Environmental interactions. Have you ever wanted to be invisible? Many species have evolved adaptations that make them nearly invisible. The seahorse in figure 10 is the same color and has a texture similar to the coral it's resting on. Whoa.
I thought that was its body.
Wow. That is one tiny, yeah.
That must be a baby.
This is a structural adaptation called camouflage. Camouflage is an adaptation that enables a species to blend in with its environment. Next paragraph about mimicry. Favorite soup? Chicken noodle. It is not Ellie. It's not Julie.
Hannah.
What?
Hannah.
It is Hannah.
Had that last night for supper.
Some species have adaptations that draw attention to them. The caterpillar in figure 10 resembles a snake. Predators see it and are scared away. The resemblance of one species to another species is mimicry. Camouflage and
Mimicry.
are adaptations that help species avoid being eaten. Many other adaptations have species eat. The pelican in figure 10 has a beak and a mouth
Uniquely.
adapted to its food source, fish.
Thank you. So if you take a look at the second panel or second picture here, when you take a first glance at it, you might think it's a snake or a large lizard or something. But that is just a,
Mine looks like
yours looks like a snake. Is it a different picture? Okay. Yeah. So you can see that, yeah, it's a caterpillar, you know, it's not harmless, you know, but you see a snake and you might, oh, I don't want to mess around with snakes. The pelican, it's got that structural adaptation, so it can hold the fish and feed on it.
How is yours different from ours?
What?
How is yours different
The
from ours?
pictures.
But yeah, like how are they though? Different.
I don't know.
So maybe it's outdated.
Possibly. Alright, environments are complex. Species must adapt to an environment's living parts as well as to an environment's non-living parts. Non-living things include temperature, water, nutrients and soil, and climate. Deciduous trees shed their leaves during changes in climate. Camouflage, mimicry, and mouth shape are adaptations mostly to an environment's living parts. An extreme example of two species adapting to each other is shown in Figure 11. So if you take a look at Figure 11, and I hope your picture is similar, maybe not, I don't know, but this is the yucca plant and its moth pollinator. They have evolved so closely together that one cannot exist without the other. The tentacles around the moth's mouth in place of a long tongue allow it to gather and transfer pollen from one yucca flower to another yucca flower. So the only insect that can pollinate it is this moth. So the flower depends on it, and the moth has a specialized tentacle that can only get the pollen/nectar from the yucca plant.
Ours is an orchid.
Yours is an orchid with a moth with a long tongue, it looks like? Yeah. Does it have the same description as the yucca plant? Nope. What does yours say?
My aunt
This orchid and its moth pollinator have evolved so closely together that one cannot exist without the other.
Huh. Okay. So mine's got a little bit more description on that. Bottom paragraph. Favorite soup? Tomato soup. Tomato soup.
Jordan.
It is Ellie. Are we back? Ellie, did you read yesterday?
I put tomato soup.
You put tomato soup.
I think this
Does
I
it
think
sound like
something
the
Who
grass?
started it yesterday?
Erickson.
Was it who did? Okay.
Living in non-living species are also even slight environmental changes affect how species adapt. If a species is unable to adapt, it becomes extinct. The fossil record contains many fossils or species unable to adapt to change.
Thank you. Artificial selection. Adaptations provide evidence of how closely Earth species match their environments. This is exactly what Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection predicted. Darwin provided many examples of adaptation in On the Origin of Species, the book he wrote to explain his theory. So a little side note here. So when Darwin came back from his voyage, he wrote down everything in a book. He actually wrote a book. And he gave it to a few of his closest friends for feedback. And all of them were like, yeah, this is really interesting, you should move forward on it. But there was a couple that were like, I don't know, I don't think we're ready for the type of news that you're ready to break. Because at the time, you know, people had different beliefs of how things changed over time, and a lot of it was tied to religion. And so Darwin, who was deeply religious, he was actually really conflicted with his findings and what he believed. So he set it aside, put it in a drawer for 20 years. So it says Darwin did not write this book until 20 years after he developed his theory. That's false. He wrote the book, but he just set it aside for 20 years. 20 years later, Darwin got a letter from a man named Alfred Russel Wallace, who basically came to the same conclusion that Darwin made about natural selection. And Charles Darwin's like, okay, 20 years ago I put all this work together. There's no way I'm going to have another person take credit for this conclusion that I've come up with, like before he did. So then Darwin kind of beat Alfred Russel Wallace to the punch. They did present together jointly in front of a scientific community, but because Darwin had a book ready for publish and it was a very hot seller, he is credited with the theory of evolution by natural selection. So he spent those years collecting more evidence for his theory by studying barnacles, orchids, corals, and earthworms. Next paragraph, favorite soup? Broccoli cheese soup. It is not London.
That's my favorite part.
It's Julia.
I don't know what the tomato soup.
Broccoli cheese soup.
Judging by that face, you're like, why? Did I really put that down? No way.
No, I like that soup. It's about half. Can I read the paragraph after that one?
Okay. Darwin also had a hobby of breeding domestic pigeons. He selectively bred pigeons of different colors and shapes to provide new fancy varieties, as you can see here in Figure 12. The breeding of organisms for desired characteristics is called selective breeding. Like many domestic plants and animals provided produced from selective breeding, pigeons look different from their ancestors, as shown in figure 12. Darwin realized that changes caused by selective breeding were much like changes caused by natural selection. Instead of nature selecting variations, humans selected them. Darwin called this process artificial selection. So selective breeding turns into artificial selection. So you kind of see here, both types of these pigeons have come from the rock pigeon at the top. And so they say this is a powder pigeon and this is a fantail pigeon. All right, Julia, last pair.
Artificial selection complains and exports Darwin's theory. As you will read in lesson 3, other evidence will support the idea that species evolve from other species.
All right, that's the last page, right? For the section?
Yep.
Okay, just so you know, on this next page right here, it talks about the couple that I told you that go back to the island. They've been back for like over 40 years, Peter and Rosemary Grant. That's the old elderly couple that go back every year, capture all the finches and tag them, and record evolution as it's happening. Okay, why can't I? All right, if you could, go to Google Classroom. Classwork. And open up the Adaptations project.
Oh, I turned a bunch of my stuff in.
Okay. So this is what you're going to be working on for the next day and a half. It is an animal or plant adaptation. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to pick any animal or plant. Okay? So you pick an animal, no doubling up. Okay? No doubling up.
What's that mean?
So if you wanted to do a tiger, Tate could do a tiger. So
How are we supposed to know what the person does?
just kind of make an announcement to the class. You can write it on the board too. I don't care.
Can we look it up on the internet?
Oh, of course, because that's the next thing here. So number
Did
2,
we do dinosaur?
no, you need to do a living creature.
Right now existing in this very planet.
Okay, so then the next thing you're going to do is you need to find one example for each of the 3 adaptations. So structural adaptation, the coloration of it, the physical structure of it, maybe it's got claws or some special, like a pelican's beak, whatever. So you need to write one adaptation for structural, one adaptation for behavioral or how it acts. The toughest one will be finding a functional adaptation, because that's the one that deals with biochemistry. So if you don't find something for functional, try the word physiological. I'll write it on the board for you. Physiological adaptations, and maybe something will pop up. But you need one of each. If you want to add more, that's fine, but you for sure need the 3 types. Tayton.
So does the thing we're writing about have to be like something that everybody knows about, or can it be
Nope.
like?
I have someone last hour that's doing something called a blue-footed lizard or blue-tongued lizard, or I don't know. But there's been some interesting animals.
So like, can I do my?
You can't do a jackrabbit because it's in the book. You can't do a jackrabbit because the book already did it for you. Nope.
Can I do a cheetah?
Yes, you can do a cheetah.
So I can do
An
my.
alligator.
Julia.
Can I do a wolf?
Sure.
Can I look up
Alligator?
some?
What?
Can I look up some?
If you want. Tayton. Okay. Anyone
So
else?
like, can I do, like, could my pet be one? Or no?
It's domesticated, so you may have a hard time trying to find some of these. Okay, so then once you have an adaptation for each, then you're going to draw a picture of that animal on the second page. Now you're like, wait a minute, Mrs. Erickson, I'm terrible at drawing pictures. Yeah, exactly. I'm freaking out. Right, okay. If you do it in Notability, then you can find a picture on the internet, paste it in, trace it, and then delete the picture. Okay? Or if you want to do it on paper, I'll give you paper, you can find a picture on the internet, print it off, go to a window, and trace it.
Okay.
So it's up to you. I really don't care. But you are drawing it. You are not going to find a picture on the internet and just boom, done, be done with it. No. So you're going to invest a little bit of time and energy into it. Okay, so then once you have your picture drawn, then on your picture you're going to label where those adaptations are. Okay? So here's my Australian wallaby that I drew. And there I labeled the behavioral. Keeps cool by licking hands or paws and wrists. Down here, structural or functional, has the ability to pause fetal development. Structural, there's the rudder, of the tail. And then make sure at the top you write down the animal's name. Okay? So, you're doing research today,
Jackrabbit or the.
and then you can start drawing your picture once you have one of each type. And I think that's it. Any other questions? Am I missing something? No? Okay.